Hmm? Hindi pa? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to another live streaming of Basic Transfer Pricing. Thank you very much. Ilan na yung ating subscriber? Okay, so thank you very much. We have 720 subscribers. And I would like to say thank you, no? Ilan yung viewers? 5 viewers. Okay, so we have 5 viewers. Good evening po sa 5 viewers natin. Thank you very much, no? And filing season na talaga. The filing season is here. So, wala tayong ano dyan, wala tayong kawala sa filing season natin, no? And anyway, transfer pricing pong pag-usapan natin this evening. Bukas yung ating tax training, no? And doon natin i-discuss yung Create Law, Republic Act 11534, no? Yung bagong rate ng income tax. Anyway, effective yan ng July 2020, kaya hindi ko alam paano yung implementing guidelines yan ng BIR. We will also wait for the implementing guidelines ng BIR dahil paano nila i-implement yan, no? Kasi retroactive yan ng July 2020. So, yung marami ng mga corporate taxpayers na nakapagbayad na, nakapag-file na ng kanilang income tax, no? So, overpayment sila doon dahil 30% ang income tax rate ng corporation. Ngayon, ginawa na lang na 20 at saka 25%. So, sobra yung binayaran ng iba. Yung iba na nakapagbayad na, no? So, hintayin na po natin yung guidelines ng BIR. Meron na silang draft. So, pag napirmahan na yan at na-finalize na, saka po tayo discuss thoroughly on that. But this evening, our topic is about comparability analysis, no? So, how the 5 comparability analysis natin ay apply natin pag gumagawa po tayo ng transfer pricing analysis. I would like to say or shout out po kina Vanji, no, sa Central. Tapos, sino pa yung mga nanonood sa atin dyan? Walang shout out, Tare? Wala pa po. Sige. Okay, so shout out tayo dyan sa mga taga Mandaluyong. At saka, di yung ating tax tagpi or yung ating tax advisors group, no? Ang dami na nila. So, good evening po. At saka, sa Negros, no? Sa Bacolod, sa mga office mate natin dyan, sa mga kamag-anak sa Cebu, and also sa Mindanao, no? So, good evening po sa lahat and continue po tayo with our discussions. Anyway, yung topic natin ngayon, meron tayong discussions on the 5 factors of the comparability analysis. And then yung ating case is about the Societa Italiana versus the Italian Court of Cassation. No? Yung taxation nila. So, Italian companies po ito and years involved are ilang years ito at saka yung kanilang disallowance, no, ng mga claim expenses nila doon sa services nila, yung nagpo-provide ng mga services sa pipeline, no? May mga tax years sila dito na disallow yung kanilang tax authority. Pero ang nangyari dito, hindi po nanalo yung tax authority, no? Panalo dito yung taxpayer. So, ang ginawa dito, yung case na to, binalik ulit sa tax authority nila for the computation talaga ng tax, no? Okay. ...2012, no? 2012. Okay. Sige. So, before we discuss the case, may citation din po itong case na to doon sa case ng Glencore Investment Limited and then the Commissioner of Taxation sa Australia naman po to. Ito yung pagbintahan nila ng mga copper concentrate, no? Na binibenta at a lower price sa parent company niya sa Switzerland, no? But in this case, panalo yung Glencore dito. No, hindi nanalo dito yung tax authority. Okay. So let's now go with our discussion on the 5 transfer pricing analysis factors. Paano natin i-apply yun sa pag gumagawa na tayo ng transfer pricing analysis? Ano ba ang transfer pricing analysis or yung that is part of the transfer pricing documentation? Di ba po ba nire-require tayo sa RR2-2013 natin on the transfer pricing documentation, and that transfer pricing documentation, kasama dyan yung transfer pricing analysis. Why? What is the purpose of the transfer pricing analysis? We have to prove that the transactions of the related parties are arm's length or at par or similar with that of the independent party transactions. So yun po yung purpose. At ang sabi na nga natin, the heart of transfer pricing is comparability. Why? Because the transfer pricing adheres to the arm's length principle, and that arm's length principle requires that you compare the related party transactions with that of the independent transactions, because the transactions between independent parties are the true transactions. Why? Because the related party transactions has the element of control, no? So one party is controlling the other so that yung transactions between them are no longer the true transactions, but it is already an artificial, no? There is already what we call as artificial price management, because the one of the party is controlled by another, no? And what is the purpose of control? According to our accounting standards, the purpose of control is to gain benefits, no? And what is usually that benefits? In order that the element of control is applied, no? Ano yung benefits na nakukuha? Usually, it's about tax savings, no? Nakaka-save ng taxes, kaya yung element of control, especially in the pricing of goods and services, is directed towards tax savings. So how are you going to impose the pricing of goods and services between the related parties in such a way that you save the payment of taxes, no? So yun yung tinitingnan at gustong i-regulate po ng ating mga tax authorities in order that proper taxes should be paid where it is due, no? Kung saan yung dapat siya bayaran, doon siya babayaran. And for your information, ano yung agreed principle natin in the payment of income tax? Income tax should follow the principal, no? Sino yung principal? Yung taxpayer na talagang dapat siya yung magbayad. So if the principal is an American, so he is registered or a resident of the United States, may tinatawag tayo na mga mobile income. Ano yung mobile income? It follows where the principal is. So kung ikaw ay US citizen and recipient ka ng income, yung income na dapat i-receive mo is taxable in the United States. Why? Kasi resident ka doon. If you are a Filipino citizen and you earn from the United States, no, that income of yours in the United States is also taxable in the Philippines. Why? Because you are a resident Filipino citizen. So, it follows kung saan ka, doon taxable yung income mo. In contrast with that of the value-added tax is taxed at the place of consumption. So, when the goods is shipped to your country, ano ibig sabihin nun? It will be consumed in that country. So that the customs, no, the Bureau of Customs, upon entry of the goods or services, kukolektahin na nila yung advance VAT na tinatawag, the advance value-added tax. Why? Kasi pumasok na siya sa territory ng isang bansa. So, anong ibig sabihin? Why is it that you bring that goods in the Philippines for consumption in the Philippines. Kasi bakit mo pa naman gagastusan yan, padala dito, kung hindi mo naman i-consume dito. No? So, yan po ang rationale ng payment of taxes, kung saan sila babayaran. No? So, yung between the income tax and the value-added tax. So, pag sinasabi natin na VAT at the place of the consumption, pag sinasabi natin na income, at the place where the recipient is registered or is a resident. No? Okay. So let's now go to the 5 comparability factors. So what are the 5 factors, no, that is used in comparability, and they are very important when you make a transfer pricing analysis. Why? Ano ba ang ginagawa pag nag-transfer pricing analysis tayo? Di po ba yung transfer pricing analysis natin, apply natin lahat ng methods, no? Yung lahat ng mga factors, i-present natin, wala tayong makakaligtaan, so that once the transfer pricing transactions are properly recorded and all the transactions are properly reported or reconciled with that of the filing of your tax returns, then hindi tayo mahirapan when it comes to the tax audit, no? Kasi lahat-lahat is being accounted for. Okay. So what are the 5 comparability factors? Makikita ba yan sa likod, Hari? No? So 5 comparability factors, we have the characteristics of the goods or services, no? Okay. So these are the 5 comparability factors that we are going to use when we make a transfer pricing analysis. So why are this very important? Kasi pag may nakalimutan ka dito na isa, that will affect the quality or the documentation of your transfer pricing analysis, no? So number 1 factor is the nature or characteristic of goods or services. Why? Because when we compare, and then the nature or characteristic of goods or services that we compare differs, then hindi sila comparable, no? Kasi bakit? Naghahanap tayo ng transactions na comparable. So, if the nature or characteristic of goods or services na kino-compare natin are different, then of course, those goods or services are not comparable. So, it is very important that we have to determine the nature or characteristics of the goods or services so that that same nature or characteristics ng goods or services, sila yung ating i-compare, no? And then we have the number 2, the functions, assets, and risks. Anyway, isa-isahin natin to with the guidelines of OECD transfer pricing guidance. Isa-isahin natin to explain so that ma-appreciate din po ninyo, no? So what are the functions, assets, and risk, or the FAR analysis? Why? Why are you going to study the functions? Because if there is a difference in functions, then those companies are not comparable, then you have to look for another one. Hindi mo ma-complete yung transfer pricing study mo kung yung mga ginamit mong companies have different functions, no? And then we have to analyze also the assets, no? Kasi halimbawa yung isang company has 1 million assets, you cannot compare it with a company with more than 100 million assets, no? Magkaiba yan sila. Okay. In terms of performance, in terms of the pricing of goods and services, iba yung pricing ng malaki ang assets, no? And then the risk. Risk is a very important factor, no? Sa paggawa ng transfer pricing analysis. Why? Because sa risk, whoever assume the risk should be properly paid or remunerated or compensated, no? So it is very important who assumes the risk in a certain transactions, no? So yan ang tinatawag natin na FAR analysis. Functions, assets, and risk, no? And then the third comparability factors is the economic condition. So what is the economic condition? Especially last year, no? You have to mention the effect of the COVID-19 in business. So when you make a transfer pricing analysis, you have to reflect or explain the economic condition as it affects the business condition and the strategies that the uh, taxpayers did, no, in managing the pandemic, especially the COVID-19, no. So, number 4, we have the contractual terms. Ano ba yung mga contractual terms? That's why ako, pag gumagawa ako ng transfer pricing analysis, hindi pwede na walang contracts. You have to review, no, sa mga aspiring transfer pricing analyst, you have to review the financial statements at saka sa actual na business activities of your client, no? Once na makikita mo na in their dealings, there should be a contract, hindi ka mapayag na hindi ka nila bibigyan ng kontrata. There are some client that because of the Data Privacy Act, sabi nila hindi pwede, no? Because that is confidential. Ang sagot ko dyan, the transfer pricing analysis report itself is also confidential, no? So whatever result of the transfer pricing analysis that will come up, it is only between you and your client, no? Hindi yan pwede na you're an accountant and then i-open mo yun sa lahat, no? You will be charged of the data privacy. So yun yung data privacy, the violation. Pero kung you make a transfer pricing analysis, you gather the contractual terms, it's not a violation of the Data Privacy Act. Why? Kasi client, ano yan yung professional at saka client relationship yan, that is protected or privileged communication. Kaya, hindi ako pumapayag talaga na walang contract. Why? Because it should be disclosed properly in your transfer pricing study. Patayin mo na yung aircon. And then we have the business strategies. So ano itong business strategies? These business strategies are employed by the client, especially if meron siyang dinidevelop, no? Na halimbawa, strategies to increase market share. So gagawa ka ng mga promo o kaya you lower down your price, no? So the business strategies can be a reason why the certain player or the economic entity has a different pricing of its goods and services. It's because of business strategies, no? So these are the 5 comparability factors. Number 1, nature or characteristic of goods or services. Number 2, we have the functions, assets, and risk analysis. Number 3 is economic condition. Number 4, contractual terms. And number 5, the business strategies, no? Okay, so isa-isahin po natin yan with the aid of the OECD transfer pricing guidance. Ano yung ating gagawin dyan, no? So, first we start with the functions, no? Functions of the functions or characteristics, no? Nature or characteristics of goods and services. Diyan muna tayo mag-umpisa. Pangalawa na yung functions, no? So what are the nature or characteristic of goods and services, and why do we have to study it in the presentation of our transfer pricing analysis report, no? Because, no, sa characteristics of property or services, and that services, whether that property, no, or goods or services, whether tangible or intangible, no? Pag sinabi nating tangible, it has a physical substance, while pag sinabi nating intangible, it has no physical substance, but they are very important to the business, and especially some of those intangibles are value drivers of the business, no? So what are the characteristics of property or services? The characteristics, iba-iba yan, no? Depending on the actual. So differences in the specific characteristics of property or services often account, at least in part, for differences in their value in the open market. No? Kasi kung ang characteristics ng goods mo is durable, no? And then, maganda na siya, then durable pa, and then, marami siyang mga characteristics na maganda, of course, it requires also higher payment, no? Higher price. Therefore, comparison of the features may be useful in delineating the transaction and in determining the comparability of controlled and uncontrolled transactions. No? Characteristics that may be important to consider include the following in the case of transfer of tangible property. So, the physical features of the property, its quality and reliability, so very important po yan. That's why, yung ibang mga products na branded, no, they are protecting the brand. Why? Anong pinoproteksyonan nila? The product, no? So, they see to it na yung product nila is protected worldwide. That's why nagbabayad sila sa WIPO or the World Intellectual Property Office. No? Why is it that it's very important na bantayan mo yung products mo, no? Kasi baka gagayahin, no? So pag ginaya na yung product mo, may nagbenta na iba but at lesser quality and then cheaper, then you have to protect it, no? Kasi you have to bring a case in court para dun sa mga nag-influence or nanggagaya ng produkto mo, no? Why? Because the characteristics may be important to consider include the following, no? In the case of transfer of tangible property, the physical features of the property, its quality and reliability, and the availability and volume of supply, no? So in the case of the provision of services, the nature and extent of the services, and in the case of intangible property, the form of transaction. So, halimbawa na lang yung sinabi niya dito, licensing or sale, no? The type of property, whether patent, trademark, know-how, the duration and degree of protection, no? Kasama pa rin yan, i-disclose mo. And the anticipated benefits from the use of the property. So, what are the anticipated benefits from the use of the property? For further discussion of some of the specific features or intangibles, actually, yung intangibles, we have discussed that nung nakaraan pa, no? Mayroon na tayong discussions about intangible, no? Pero sabi dito, intangibles may be proved important in a comparability analysis involving transfer of intangibles or rights in intangibles, no? Okay. So, depending daw on the transfer pricing method, the factor must be given more or less weight, no? So, among the methods described at Chapter 2 of these guidelines, the requirement for comparability of property or services is the strictest for the comparable uncontrolled price method, no? Kasi dito sa comparability analysis, nag-a-analyze tayo, no? Kaya nga ang sabi dito sa guidelines, yung comparable uncontrolled price method, ang ginagamit talaga niya na basihan is the nature or characteristics of the goods and services, no? Kasi certain deviation lang dyan o difference ng characteristics may prove to be serious when it comes to comparing the transactions, no? So, halimbawa, same lang yung price nila, but the characteristics of the property or services is lower in quality with that of the other. So, magkakaroon ng adjustment sa price, no? Kasi ang price is influenced by the characteristics or nature of the goods or services, no? Depending on the transfer pricing method, the factor must be given more or less weight, no? So among the method described at Chapter 2 of these guidelines, the requirement for comparability of property or services is the strictest for the comparable uncontrolled price method. No? So, yung comparability, pag hindi na pareho yung characteristics, hindi na sila comparable. No? Okay. Comparability analysis for method based on gross or net profit indicator often put more emphasis on functional similarities than on product similarities. So, iba naman yun, yung nakafocus naman siya sa functions. Number 2 na factors na natin yan. No? But for nature and characteristics of goods and services, ano yan? Sa comparable and controlled price method, it is very crucial. Why? Because the difference in the nature and characteristics of the goods may prove to be the cause of difference in prices. Okay. So now let's go to the functions, no? Kasi meron pa ditong economic conditions and then the business strategies or the economic circumstances, no? So, pagdating sa functions, ito yung mga magaganda na topic eh. Pagdating sa transfer pricing analysis, yung functions, assets, and risk, no? Lalo na yung risk, napakarami niya na considerations, no? And it affects yung sa analysis natin sa transfer pricing ang risk. Okay. Okay, so we have the functional analysis. Ano ba yung functional analysis? Yung functions of the company. Ano ba yung functions ng company? The functions of the company, examples can be manufacturing, can be distributor, pwede rin siyang reseller, no? So yun ang mga functions. Pwede siyang developer, pwede rin siyang sa provision of services, no? So those are the functions of the company. In short, ano ba yung functions? It's the activity of the company. Saan natin makikita yan? And what are the supporting documents for the functions? Doon po sa, if you are using the financial statement of the company, saan siya nakikita? Doon sa number 1, sa general information. No? It is a requirement of the accounting standards in the disclosure of the financial statement that you have to describe the activity of the company. No? Because the company is an artificial being, and that artificial being give rise or nagkaroon lang siya ng life because of the provision of the law, so that the corporation should follow the provision of the law kasi doon lang siya, limitado lang siya doon sa powers and duties or obligations na binigay sa kanya ng batas, doon lang siya umiikot or doon lang yung dapat niyang sundin. No? Hindi siya pwede mag-exceed. Why? Kasi halimbawa, ang isang korporasyon, magbago siya ng functions, it should file an amended articles of incorporation and then have it approved by the SEC. No? So, yung change of functions, halimbawa, yung functions niya is to manufacture goods. And then, nagbago na siya to render services, consultancy services. So, in that case, pupunta ka talaga sa Securities and Exchange Commission and then have it approved, no? So, functions is very critical and crucial in transfer pricing analysis because difference in functions cannot be, is the only or is the reason why eliminate mo yung comparables, no? Or we can say na pag nagkaiba sila ng functions, they are no longer comparable. So if you are making a transfer pricing analysis, then you have to eliminate the company with a different functions with that of your tested party, no? So functional analysis in transactions between two independent enterprises, compensation usually will reflect the functions, no, that each enterprise performs, taking into account the asset used and the risk assumed. So therefore, in delineating the controlled transactions and determining comparability between controlled and uncontrolled transactions or entities, a functional analysis is necessary. No? So very important po yung functional analysis. The functional analysis seeks to identify the economically significant activities and responsibilities undertaken, the assets used or contributed, and the risk assumed by the parties to the transactions. The analysis focuses on what parties actually do and the capabilities they should provide, no? So sa functions, ano ba yung ginagawa ng company? At ano ba yung kaya niyang ibigay, no? Such activities and capabilities will include decision making, including decisions about business strategy and risk. For this purpose, it may be helpful to understand the structure and organization of the M&E group and how they influence the context in which the M&E operates. No? So in particular, it is important to understand how value is generated by the group as a whole. The independences of the functions performed by the associated enterprises with the rest of the group and the contribution that the associated enterprises make to the value creation. No? So, ano pa? Relevant siya in determining the legal rights and obligation of the parties, no, in performing their functions. Bakit? Kasi, of course, halimbawa sa grupo, kakaiba sila ng functions, no? But they are engaged in different functions, pero as a whole, it contributes to the attainment of the activity of the group, no? Halimbawa, yung isang manufacturing, yung another related party is a distributor, the other related party is reseller, no? Nasa retailing siya. The other company is in the provision of delivery services, no? Yung isa naman sa importation, siya yung nag-acquire ng mga raw materials. So, although the companies, members of the group have different functions, but the purpose is to develop and market its product, no? Isa lang yung and the result ng kanilang mga activities, and that is to develop and sell their product. Pero magkaiba sila ng functions. Okay, so the actual contributions, capabilities, and other features of the parties can influence the options, no, realistically available to them. So for example, an associated enterprise provides logistics services to the group. The logistics company is required to operate warehouses with spare capacity and in several locations in order to be able to cope in the event that supply is disrupted at any location. The option of greater efficiency through consolidation of location and reduction in existing capacity is not available, no? So its functions and assets may therefore be different to those of an independent logistics company. So functional analysis should consider the type of assets used, such as plant and equipment, the use of valuable intangibles, financial assets, and nature of assets used, such as the market value, location, property rights, protection available, and others. So, yun po yung the importance of functions in making your transfer pricing analysis, no? So, functions is very important. And then the next is the assets, no? So, paano tayo mag-analyze ng assets? Of course, the assets that are being used by the company in the provision of its services, no? Or the making of its goods. So, very important po na meron tayong analysis ng risk, no? So, analysis of risk in commercial or financial relations. Ano yung analysis ng risk dito and how do we analyze the risk, no? May mga steps po dito na binigay yung OECD because nga sabi natin risk is very important, no? That influence the pricing of goods and services. So risk is inherent in business activities, no? Why? Kasi inherent ang risk eh. So pagka may business activity ka, expect mo na talaga yan na meron niyang risk, no? So enterprises undertake commercial activities because they seek opportunities. No? Naghahanap sila ng opportunities to make profits. Kaya nga ang ating study of transfer pricing is about economic taxation. Why? Because we examine the economic activity of the parties. No? Okay. So identifying risk goes hand in hand with identifying functions and assets, and is integral in the process of identifying the commercial or financial relations between the associated enterprises and of accurately delineating the transaction or transactions. The assumption of risk associated with commercial opportunity affect the profit potential of the opportunity in the open market, and the allocation of risk assumed between the parties to the arrangement affects how profits or losses resulting from the transaction are allowed at arm's length through the pricing of the transactions. Because the pricing of the transactions are influenced by the risk that would be assumed by the parties in the transaction. No? So, sa mga previous example natin, pareho sila ng function, distributor, but the other distributor assume the risk and the other is not. So there is a difference in prices that you can pinpoint and you will make an adjustment to make the two transactions equal. No? Okay. So what are the steps in the process set out in the analyzing risk in a controlled transaction? No? So number 1, identify economically significant risk with specificity. No? So, para ma-manage mo kasi yung risk or kasama mo sa study, you have to identify it. No? Determine how specific economically significant risks are contractually assumed by the associated enterprises under the term of the transaction. So, yung risk na yan, economically significant, contractual ba yan in nature, no? Kasi kung contractual, meron kayang kontrata, no? And that contract, be sure kasi very important na rin yung contract, no? Sinabi mong contractual assumption, no? So, very important that in the contract pa lang, dinidefine na yung risk, no? At saka kung ano yung gagawin ng taxpayer if mayroon ng assumption of risk, no? Ano yung boom 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 na yun, Hari? Okay, so wala na. No? Okay. So determine through a functional analysis how the associated enterprises that are parties to the transaction operate in relation to assumption and management of the specific economically significant risk. No? And in particular, which enterprises perform control functions and risk mitigation functions. No, kasi sa risk kasi, you have to recognize that there is risk, and then pag next to that, you have to manage the risk, no? May mga mitigation ka na nagagawin, no? Okay. So where party assuming risk under steps 1 to 4 does not control the risk or does not have the financial capacity to assume the risk, apply the guidance on allocating risk, no? Kasi pagka marami na talaga yung risk. Actually, dito sa allocation of risk, ang daming transfer pricing issues dyan na decided by the court, no? So, itong sa allocation ng risk, no? And then the capacity to assume the risk. No? Okay. The actual transaction is accurately delineated by considering the evidence of all the economically relevant characteristics of the transaction as set out in the guidance in section D.1. should then be priced taking into account the financial and other consequences of risk assumption as appropriately allocated and compensated. No? Okay. References are made to terms that require initial explanation and definition. No? So the term risk management is used to refer to the function of assessing and responding to risk associated with commercial activity. No? So risk management comprises three elements. Number one, the capability to make decision to take on, lay off, or decline a risk-bearing opportunity. Together with the actual performance of that decision-making functions, the capability to make decision on whether and how to respond to the risk associated with opportunity together with the actual performance of that decision-making functions. Okay, so another is the capability to mitigate the risk. That is the capability to make measures that affect risk outcomes, no? Together with the actual performance of that risk mitigation. No? So yung risk outcome and then risk mitigation, no? So ano yun na mitigate mo yung risk. Pag sinabi mo na mitigate, na lower down mo yung risk, no? Okay. Okay. So how are you going to manage the risk, no? You have to perform the risk mitigation activities, no? Okay. So step 1, identify economically significant risk with specificity. No? So ano yung gagawin mo? I-identify mo yung risk, no? There are many definitions of risk, but in transfer pricing context, it is appropriate to consider risk as the effect of uncertainty on the objective of the business. Kasi ang risk usually negative yan eh, no? So in all of companies' operations, every step taken to exploit opportunities every time a company spends money or generates income, uncertainty exists and the risk is assumed. No? A company is likely to direct much attention to identify uncertainties it encounters in evaluating whether and how business opportunities should be pursued in view of their inherent risk. No? So, yun po yung step 1, you have to identify the economically significant risk with specificity. No? So ano itong mga example ng risk? We have financial risk. These are risks likely to affect a company's financial performance. So yun yung financial risk. How about transactional risk? These are likely to include pricing and payment terms in a commercial transaction for the supply of goods, property, or services. Yun yung tinatawag na transactional risk, no? Hazard risk. These are likely to include adverse external events, no, that may cause damages or losses, including accidents and natural disasters. Yun ang hazard risk. Such risk can often be mitigated through insurance, but insurance may not cover all the potential loss, no? Particularly where there are significant impacts on operations or reputation. So, yan ang mga kind ng risk. Yung next is step 2, contractual assumption of risk. So, ano yung contractual assumptions? may kontrata, and be sure na kung gumagawa kayo ng kontrata, it should be very specific on the provisions. No? Okay. May shoutout tayo, Hari? Ilan yung nanonood?
8 viewers.
Okay, so shoutout po sa ating 8 viewers. No? Okay. So, nasa contractual assumption of risk po tayo because sabi na nga natin, the assumption of risk has a significant effect on determining arm's length pricing between associated enterprises, and it should not be concluded that the pricing arrangement adopted in the contractual arrangements alone determine which party assume the risk. No? Kaya sa contractual terms pa lang, well-defined na doon sino yung parties into the transactions. No? Okay, wala na shout-out?
Wala pa po.
Okay. Ilang minutes na tayo?
45 minutes.
45 minutes. So, wala pa tayong 1 hour, no? Anyway, maraming pa tayong di-discuss. Nasa number 2 pa lang tayo ng comparability analysis, no? Anyway, sa susunod, mga pre-recorded videos na kami, no? Kasi, baka makapag-inject na tayo sa COVID, pwede na tayong ano na yung pwede ka nang gumala, tama ba yun? Pwede ka nang magpunta kung hindi na masyadong sinisita kasi kung vaccine ka na, may vaccine na, no? Ang dami na pala nagpa-vaccine eh. Si Ma'am Selvia, yung nurse sa PGH, naka-2 dose na siya, no? So, magpapa-register tayo, Hari, online. Pero may online registration and it's free pala. Kala ko kasi may bayad dyan.
So, mga ano lang madam, mga senior.
Free?
Senior, tsaka mga frontliner.
So ako free na ako, ha? Very good. Baka, sige. So, kanino hindi free?
Mga katulad namin.
Kasi kaya pa.
Mga bata pa.
So, very good, no? Step 3, functional analysis in relation to risk, no? In this step, the functions in relation to risk of the associated enterprises that are parties to the transaction are analyzed, no? So, yun yung functional analysis ng risk. So, the analysis provides information about how the associated enterprises operate in relation to the assumption and management of the specific economically significant risk. No? So, in particular, which enterprise or enterprises perform control functions and risk mitigation functions? Which enterprise or enterprises encounter upside or downside consequences of risk outcomes, and which enterprise or enterprises have financial capacity to assume the risk. No? This can be your guide, pag gumawa kayo ng transfer pricing analysis. Kasi sa totoo lang, wala naman tayong guide when we make the transfer pricing analysis. But based on my experience and on the cases na nabasa ko, it is very important that every detail, no, ng transactions ng company, especially the 5 comparability factors, you disclose that in your transfer pricing analysis report. No? Kasi pag nakakita ng issue, yung transfer pricing officer doon, na-disclose mo. No? Madali na lang mag-reason out. Ang problema, nakita na issue ng examiner, hindi mo na-disclose. No? So, ibig sabihin, there is bad faith in part of the taxpayer to conceal some of the information. No? The step is illustrated in the following examples. Ang daming mga examples dito, pero wala naman tayong time. No? Okay. So, you have to interpret yung mga steps na sinasabi natin kanina sa inyo. No? And then we have the allocation of risk. How is risk being allocated? Siyempre, ang risk daw, the more you have the risk, the more you have rewards, no? Because risk is may mga uncertainties dyan sa risk eh. So, ibig sabihin, kung yung risk na yan that ginawa mo, nagkaroon ka ng reward. So, o kaya in a group, so how do you allocate the risk? The one with contribution to whatever activities that you have. So, based on the contribution na yan, nag-assume siya ng risk, doon mo ibabase yung kanyang compensation or remuneration. No? So, allocation of the risk, it is established in step 4 that associated enterprise, assuming the risk based on step 1 to 4, does not exercise control over the risk or does not have the financial capacity to assume the risk. Then the risk should be allocated to the enterprise exercising control and having the financial capacity to assume the risk. Bakit? Kasi sometimes imposed na lang yan between related parties who assume the risk. But the fact is, the one who assume the risk has the capacity to pay for that risk when it happens. So anong totoo niyan? It's not really that party who is the owner of the risk, but yung may capacity, sometimes the parent company, yung may capacity to pay for the risk or to assume for that risk. No? If multiple associated enterprises are identified that both exercise control and have the financial capacity to assume the risk, then the risk should be allocated to the associated enterprise or group of associated enterprises exercising the most control. No? So the other parties performing control activities should be enumerated appropriately, taking into account the importance of the control activities performed. No? Okay. Step 6, pricing of the transactions taking account of the consequences of risk allocation. No? Okay. So, in the pricing of the transactions, so nandiyan na talaga allocate mo na yung risk. No? Okay. Next, sana tayo, after the FAR analysis, our next number 3 is the economic conditions. No? So ano ba yung sinasabi dito na economic conditions? No? Ito, tawag dito sa OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines is economic circumstances. No? So arm's length prices may vary across different markets even for transactions involving the same property or services. No? So therefore, to achieve comparability requires that the markets in which the independent and associated enterprises operate do not have differences that have a material effect on price or that appropriate adjustment can be made. No? As a first step, it is essential to identify the relevant market or markets taking account of available substitute goods or services. No? Okay. Existence of cycle for the economic business or product cycle, no, is one of the economic circumstances that should be identified. No? Yung may business cycle. No? Geographic market is another economic circumstances that should be identified. No? So yung geographic market. In case where similar control transactions are carried out by an M&A group in several countries and where the economic circumstances in these countries are in effect reasonably homogeneous, it may be appropriate for that M&A group to rely on multiple country comparability analysis to support its transfer pricing policy towards this group of countries. No? But there are also numerous situations where an M&A group offers significantly different ranges of product or services in each country. and or perform significantly different functions in each of these countries, no? So yun po yung sa economic, no? Marami yan, economic conditions. Ang isa nga na tinitingnan ko ngayon, no? Nagre-research din ako yung economic conditions of the Philippines ng iba't ibang industry, no? Just like pharmaceutical. Ano ba nangyari sa kanya during the pandemic, no? Sabi nga nung isang kliyente ko, they are not affected, no? Although may ibang company sila na affected, but for the group itself, lumaki pa yung kanilang sales, no? During the pandemic. Pero, how about naman sa ibang industry, just like yung transportation, no? Kawawa talaga sila, tinamaan. How about the travel agencies? No? So, tinamaan din kasi bawal lumabas. So, walang mag-travel. So, kung yun yung business mo, you're out of business, no? Okay, so anong gagawin? Magsi-shift ka na naman doon sa iba. Okay. Yan po yung economic condition. So we have to be in number 4, the contractual terms. Ano ba yung mga contractual terms? Sa paggawa po ng transfer pricing analysis, titingnan nyo na kaagad kung there are contracts, especially in the transfer pricing documentation. Take note, in Revenue Regulations na 34-2020, meron tayong BIR Form 1709 dyan, that we are going to fill up kung filing na ng income tax return because we have to attach it sa income tax return, no? Annual. So, yung BIR Form 1709, nandoon nakalagay kung ano-anong mga documentation required for the company to prove its transfer pricing. Ano yung transfer pricing niya? It should be arm's length, no? So, sa contractual terms, nire-require that all the contracts that you signed during the year or those contracts signed in the previous year but still existing during the year. No? So, lahat yan isama mo. And then, titingnan mo lahat ng provisions ng kontrata if they are arm's length. No? Kasi especially between related parties, just like sa case ng Coca-Cola, ano yung mga ano yung isa pa na natalo yung Coca-Cola doon? Because hinahanap yung mga contracts nila with the distributor. Because yung owner ng IP, intellectual properties nila or intangibles, si Coca-Cola US, no? So, ano yung hinahanap nila doon sa mga kontrata, no? Yung provisions, kung arm's length ba yung determination ng compensation or ng fee. But sad to say, yung karamihan ng mga distributor ni Coca-Cola, wala po silang kontrata. At there are contracts na during the transfer pricing study were declared void, no? Kasi yung mga kontrata has no consideration. So, it cannot be enforced at it cannot even be called a contract, no? Kasi sa contract natin, sa obligations and contract natin, may mga prerequisite yung kontrata para magiging enforceable, no? And then, meron pa akong experience, no, sa transfer pricing pa rin, that during my study, nire-require ko yung contracts na lahat-lahat ng sinaynan nila during the year. Yung iba talaga ayaw ipakita, no? Kasi, sabi ko, consultant nyo naman ako eh. So, let me see your contract so that makagive ako ng suggestion kung how to make it arm's length, no? Pero yung iba talaga ayaw magpakita ng contracts, no? Kasi, anong sabi ng OECD? You have to review the contracts and the contractual terms and see to it that they are arm's length. And aside from that, Since kontrata yan, it is not only a formality. Ano dapat? Sinusunod yung mga provisions sa contracts because it might be na gagawin na yung kontrata pero hindi naman sinusunod. No? And then the last comparability factors natin is the business strategies. Anong oras na, Hari? Ilang oras na tayo?
1 hour po, sakto.
Sakto pa lang. Tama kasi magsi-shift na ako sa sa case. Why? Kasi sa comparability factors, nasa number 5 na tayo. And what is that number 5 natin? That is about business restructuring. No? So, business strategies. No? Na ako sa restructuring. Na favorite ko kasi ang daming issues po doon. No? Business restructuring. And for your information, yung business restructuring, yan talaga ang tinututukan ng Philippine Competition Commission, no? Especially sa pharmaceutical industries, no? Kasi malalaking companies yan. So, napaka-importante po at napakarami na ring mga issues in business restructuring, no? But in comparability factors, we're talking about the business strategies. And what are those business strategies? Ano ba itong mga business strategies na sinasabi dito? These are strategy of the companies in order to, halimbawa na lang, market its product, no? Or kung ano-anong ginagawa ng company just to earn market share in the market, no? O magiging sellable yung product niya or goods and services, no? So, or maraming strategies. And you have to see to it that when you make a transfer pricing analysis, you disclose also the business strategies na ginagawa yung taxpayer or yung tested party nyo. No? Okay. Why? Because the business strategist might be the reason why na loss ang isang company, no? That's why sa ginagawa ko naman na transfer pricing analysis, ang daming tanong ng management, no? So, but para sa akin, ako gagawa lang, I just present the result to you, no? So, whether arm's length siya or hindi arm's length, then you have to disclose kasi analysis ka lang naman eh, hindi naman pwede na baguhin mo yung kung ano yung nagiging findings, no? Okay. So walang shout out?
Wala pa po madam.
Ilan yung viewers?
7.
Okay, so before po tayo mag-proceed with our may kopya ka na dyan?
Meron na po.
Yung sa case?
Meron na po.
Oh, sige. Before we proceed, CCR lang po ako sandali ha. Break lang sandali. Okay. So let's now go to the discussion of the case that we have tonight, no? And this is about Societa Italiana versus Italian Court of Cassation, no? Uh, what is this case about, no? This is about the uh, parang adjustment sa income tax, no? Ng company kasi ang sabi dito napakaliit ng kanya din declare na value below the yung sa services na binibigay niya, mababa yung kanyang sinisingil doon sa related parties, no? So, this case no, is an appeal filed by Agencia delle Entrate in the person of the Director Pro Tempore, represented by the Avvocatura Generale dello Stato. No, so ito yung mga, ano kasi Italian ito. No? So with legal domicile in Rome, via del Portuguese, no, yung mga Portuguese. Number 12, at the Avvocatura Generale dello Stato, applicant, no? Against is IOT or the Societa Italiana per Loolo Doto. Ito yung pangalan ng company, no? Transalpino SPA. So, represented and defended by Corrado Diso. Sino to si Corrado Diso? Siya yung lawyer ng taxpayer. With legal domicile in Rome via Coseria number 5 at the chambers of Laura Triseri, no, counter-appellant, against the judgment of the Commissione Tributaria Regionali del Friuli Venezia Giulia, section number 11, number 56, no? Delivered on April 18, 2012. Lodged on May 30, 2012. Here, the report carried out in the Board of Directors meeting of February 25, 2020 by Director Ricardo Guida. No? Si Ricardo Guida pala is the director, no? Ng tax. No? So, it was noted that the dispute, so number one na dispute. The dispute concerns the appeal, no? Sino nag-appeal dito? With separate appeals by SIOT, ito yung Societa, ito yung taxpayer, no? By SIOT, Societa Italiana per Olodoto Transalpino SPA, which operates the Transalpine oil pipeline, no? That crosses Italy, Austria, and Germany, no? So, yan yung mga underwater pipe, no? Saan dumadaan yan? Sa ilalim ng dagat, yung mga pipes, no? Ano yun? Transalpine oil pipeline. Ano ang dumadaan dyan? Mga oil, no? Kaya pag nag-transmit sila ng mga oil dyan, yan dinadaan sa ilalim ng dagat. No? Kaya sa transportation law natin, no? Ang pipeline under the sea are considered common carrier. Bakit common carrier siya? Kasi nag-transport siya ng goods, no? At ano yung goods na transport ng pipeline? Oil, no? Dumadaan sa kanya. At may contract yan of common carrier. Bakit? Pagdaan mo dun sa pipeline, nakakontrata yan between the may-ari ng pipeline at saka yung may-ari ng oil, no? So, sino magbabayad? Yung may-ari ng oil, babayaran niya yung may-ari ng pipeline, no? And in some cases, mga related parties yan. Kung sino yung may-ari ng pipeline, siya din yung may-ari ng oil, no? In some cases. Okay. So, itong si SIOT, siya yung may nag-ooperate ng Transalpine oil pipeline that crosses Italy, Austria, and Germany, no? So, imagine ilang countries yan. With the Austrian subsidiary TOO, no, may subsidiary pa siya. With the German subsidiary DTO, no? So, sa Austria, meron siyang subsidiary. Sa Germany, meron siyang subsidiary. belonging to the same group of companies, no? So, same group of companies silang, sino to? Ito yung CSIOT, at saka itong sa Australian subsidiary and the German subsidiary, no? Okay. They belong to the same group of companies, no? So, 4 notices of assessment for 2003 and 2004 to 2006, no? So, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So, issued at the conclusion of a tax audit by the trustee tax police that had ascertained higher undeclared revenues determined in application of the transfer pricing regulations. So, Article 110, Paragraph 7. Enforced ratione temporis, according to which revenue deriving from transactions with companies not resident in the territory of the state related to the domestic business must be quantified, no? Quantified. No? So, um, according to the normal value of the goods sold or services provided. No? So, i-quantified mo siya according to the normal value. Or, services provided determined on the basis of the criteria set forth in Article 9. No? Okay, so, ang i-determine daw is yung normal value ng goods sold or services provided. Okay. Number 2, in declared application of the methods approved by the OECD in its directive of transfer pricing aimed at preventing tax avoidance. So yun po talaga ang purpose ng transfer pricing, no? To eliminate or discourage or prevent tax avoidance, no? Through the artificial shifting of taxable income between group of companies. So anong ginawa nila dito? Artificial shifting ng group companies. Having the registered office in different countries, the tax-paying company had used the so-called transfer pricing profit split method, no, or profit sharing method. In order to arrive at the determination of the taxable income of each of them closer to what would have emerged if the services rendered by one to the other for the overall management of the pipeline had not been rendered between related companies, no? But between independent companies. So in a regime of free competition, in details, the profit split method, no? So profit split method daw, consisted in the economic division of the gross profit before tax, no? Achieved overall by the three companies through the subtraction from overall revenues of the total cost of the three companies. The total gross profit was divided between the related parties on the basis of percentage allocation or share. So resulting from the arithmetic average of two significant values such as the kilometers of pipeline, so yan na yung magiging factor nila. Yung kilometer ng pipeline pertaining to each of them. And therefore, the tons of crude oil passing through it and the value of the tangible fixed assets recorded in the financial statements of the subsidiaries. No? So according to the assessor, this criterion, which was theoretically exceptionable, needed to be corrected. No? So in order to determine for its company, so Ricardo guided a realistic income result in line with the operating contribution that its company had provided to the management. Yan na yung number 2. The instrument for correcting the gross profit allocation coefficient used by the tax authority consisted of considering, in addition to the kilometers managed and the value of fixed assets, Also, the cost of plant maintenance borne by its company, that of its IoT SPA, was almost 3 times higher than that of the other companies managing the pipelines due to the orography of their respective territories, which entailed for the Italian company an increase in the taxable base for each of the years under verification. No? And then number 3, the Triste Provincial Tax Commission, no, judgment number 107, 2010, having joined the appeals, upheld them with a decision that on the appeal of the office, the Friul Venetia Giulia Regional Tax Commission, in its cross-examination of the taxpayer, confirmed with the judgment indicated in the epigraph based on the following reasons. Ito na yung mga reasons nila, no? Letter A, tax authorities had adjusted the normal value adopted by the taxpayer by referring to 2 other significant parameters, no? So in addition to those already considered by the company, that of the electricity used and that of the maintenance cost borne by the individual companies, except then in practice to choose and use only one, that of maintenance cost. No? Since this is a case of tax avoidance, anong case dito? Tax avoidance. The burden of proof is borne by the tax authorities on the agency. As a substantive plaintiff, not only by virtue of the principal set jurisprudence of legitimacy, no, which equals the OECD Directive of 1995 and states that the taxpayer is not required to prove the correctness of the transfer prices applied. No? If first of all, the AF has not prima facie proved the non-respect of the normal value, no? Then letter C, the method of determination of such normal value used by the taxpayer was correct, while the corrective parameters under identified by the agency are not supported. No? So the method used by the taxpayer was fair. So fair, sabi dito while the corrective parameters identified by the agency were not supported. No? So unsupported yung sa agency. The judgment by very precise and non-optional elements, optionable elements, the consistent and closer to, that would highlight the progress, unequivocal and reliable over time of a normal value, more consistent and closer to reality than the one adopted. Okay. Which have been illogically neglected. No? Ricardo Gida contributi in order to obtain an unjustified tax benefit. No? So D, given that the issue raised by the company with an incidental appeal at the point of exclusion of the sanctions was absorbed, the exclusion of sanctions was in any case justified because of the objective difficulties in identifying the normal value in situations as in the present case of complex provision of service. No? So, complicated yung pagbigay niya ng service. Number 4, the agency resorts with 4 reasons for the cassation of the judgment. No? The company resists with a counter course. No? Okay. So, considering that, letter A, first of all, there is no basis for the company's objection to the inadmissibility of the appeal by the Court of Cassation on the ground that the agency's acquiescence is manifest to the autonomous head of the judgment. No? Concerning the alleged invalidity of the notices on the grounds of lack of reasoning, the company claims that as the first ground of appeal, The notices are null and void on the ground of lack of reasoning at the point of existence. No? Elusive intent. No? It submits that on the one hand, the trustee CDP had accepted this critical remark and that on the other, the agency had put forward a specific ground of appeal. The first, which in turn the regional commission but rejected, noting that as regards transfer pricing, the burden of proving the company's elusive intent lies with the tax authorities. No? Okay. Shout out tari, wala pa?
Wala pa po.
Okay, so ilang oras na tayo?
1 hour 20 minutes.
Okay. No? So ito may mga issues sila dito, no? Na sinagot naman din ng court, no? Okay. The agency has criticized the whole structure of the appeal decision, thus preventing the judgment from being formed on every controversial aspect of the case. No? Okay. So infringement and misapplication of Articles 9, Paragraph 3, Article 110, Paragraph 2 and 5, now Article 7 of Presidential Decree number 917 of December 22, 1986, in relation to Article 360 of the Code of Civil Procedure. No? The agency complains of the judgment under appeal in case number 19654. No? Ricardo Guida for having wrongly denied that for the purposes of determining the normal value of the transactions between related parties in compliance with the principle of free competition, the criterion chosen by the three companies managing the Transalpine pipeline based on static and asset parameters, the length of the section of pipeline managed, the balance sheet value of the fixed assets, which would require corrections directly related to the analysis of the trend of the individual financial year, such as precisely the maintenance cost of the plants, which are much higher to the Italian company, no? Than for the foreign ones due to the different trend of the respective sections of the pipeline, the uphill, the Italian section downhill, the Austrian section flat, the German one. No? Okay. So with the second plea in law, failure to state or insufficient reason on decisive factual points and in any event failure to examine a decisive fact, which is the subject of discussion between the parties and the relevant document in relation to Article 360 of the Code of Civil Procedure. Okay, so herein applicable to the text prior to the amendment pursuant to Legislative Decree number 83/2012. The agency alleges that the grounds of the judgment under appeal are inadequate. On the one hand, it confined itself to describing the method of apportionment of cost adopted by the three companies. So, without explaining why that method was capable of reproducing the result which would have been achieved under conditions of free competition. On the other hand, it failed to examine in depth the decisive aspect of its company's contribution to the peacefully unified operation of the pipeline. On the other hand, the agency accuses the CTR of not having examined a decisive document, no? One of the report of finding. Okay. So, anong tawag niya dito sa report findings? it showed that 65.88% of the maintenance costs were borne by the Italian company, no? 20.70% by the Austrian company and 13.41% by the German company, no? So it points out that if the contrary, the difference in maintenance cost have been taken into account, this item, as in a free market system, would have had an impact on the sale prices of the service and operating revenues. As it is inconceivable that highly differentiated operating cost for the same service for different companies would correspond to homogeneous revenues, no? So finally, Ricardo Guida, the agency, attributes to the judgment under appeal that it dwelt on the alleged unsuitability of the corrective criterion added by the AF to that adopted by the company, no? So without, however, taking a position beforehand on the reasons why the regional commission had instead considered a reliable the method of revenue allocation chosen by the taxpayer. Okay. With the third plea, infringement and misapplication of Article 100 of the Code of Civil Procedure in relation to Article 364 of the Code of Civil Procedure. Okay, so the agency alleges in the judgment under appeal that it erred in deciding on conditional cross appeal brought by the company, even though it upheld the company's defense on the merits. Okay. So, anong oras na?
1 hour 26.
Okay. So, rejecting the appeal of the office, which deprived the appellant of the interest in obtaining a ruling on the applicability of or otherwise of the penalties. No? Okay, so by the fourth ground, ito yung infringement and misapplication of Articles 5 and 6, no? Okay. Of Legislative Decree number 472 of 18 September 1997, no? And Article 8 of Legislative Decree number 546 of 31 December 1992. In relation to Article 364 of the Code of Civil Procedure, in the alternative, no? So the judgment under appeal is criticized for excluding the application of penalties, disregarding the fact that the penalty is applied in the event of an infringement, no, resulting from conscious and voluntary conduct on the part of the taxpayer, and can be excluded only if the agents erred in fact as a circumstance in the present case, no, not even deducted from another point of view. So the applicant denies that in the present case there was the exemption represented by the objective difficulty of interpretation of the scope of the rule infringed. Also in view of the specialist professional qualification of the operators concerned and the fact that the need to estimate the normal value depended on the free choice of the companies to form a transactional group to carry out their operations. No? The first and second pleas which are subject to joint examination because of the common legal matrix as are well founded. Okay. Okay. So, what happened na dito sa assessment nila, no? Okay. So, the OECD guidelines on transfer pricing for multinational enterprises and tax administration of 2010, no? Which in the part that concerns us here follow the guidelines of 1995, no? OECD guidelines 1995, which in turn, as the doctrine has pointed out, had exceeded Circular 332, which seemed to relegate the use of more sophisticated income methods, no, to auxiliary use, making it possible to use, among other things, the transaction profit split method or profit sharing method criteria whenever the old comparable methods were difficult and unreliable to apply. No? Okay. So, anong nagiging decision dito ng court? Oh? Okay, ilan pa yung ating nanonood, Hari?
7 pa rin po.
Okay. So, yung ating case, no? Ito yung sa yung Society Italia na, no? So, anong contention nila dito? Na tumutulong sila or ginagawa nila yung guidelines ng OECD, no, sa tax administration of 2010, no? Okay. Okay. So, the use of the more sophisticated income methods to auxiliary use, making it possible to use, among other things, no, the transactional profit split method or profit sharing method, whenever the old comparative methods were difficult and unreliable to apply, among other criteria, no? So, for transactional profit split method, which aims at eliminating the effect on profits of special conditions agreed or imposed in a controlled transaction by determining the allocation of profits that independent companies would have expected to make by carrying out the transactions, no? So this method identifies first the profit to be distributed among the associated enterprises, no? So resulting from the controlled transactions carried out by them. No? So the total profits, then these profits are distributed among the associated enterprises on the basis of an economically sound basis, which is close to the distribution of profits that would have been envisaged and taken into account in an agreement made in accordance with the principle of free competition. No? So, yung pagbigay mo ng amount dun sa serbisyo, no? Sabi ng ano na masyado mababa, ano yung sinabi dito ng taxpayer? In accordance with the principle of free competition, no? So kung free competition, may leeway ka na bakit mo ibenta ng mura yung product mo, no? Okay. The method identifies first the profits to be distributed among the associated enterprises, resulting from the controlled transactions carried out by them. No? So the total profits, then these profits are distributed among the associated enterprises on the basis of an economically sound basis. No? which is close to the distribution of profits that would have been envisaged and taken into account in an agreement made in accordance with the principle of free competition. No? So, ayan na naman. Okay, so Ricardo Guida, the main advantage of the method of sharing the profits of transaction is that it represents solution for highly integrated transaction for which a unilateral method would not be appropriate. No? Kaya nga ito yung justification nila bakit yung ginagamit nila is the transactional net margin method. No? Another advantage of the method of sharing the profits of transaction is that it allows a certain flexibility in considering specific circumstances and elements. No? So possibly exceptional relating to associated enterprises and not existing in the case of independent enterprises. Okay. So, further positive aspect of the profit-sharing method of the transaction is that it is less likely that a party to the controlled transactions will be attributed an exceptional and unlikely to make a profit since the valuation concerned both parties to the controlled transaction. So this may be particularly important in the analysis of the parties' contributions to intangible assets used in a controlled transaction. No? This bilateral approach can also be used to achieve a profit. Okay. So, nagbigay na din yung reason sa kanya dito yung mga judges, no? Why is it na okay. Okay, so ano po nangyari dito sa case na to? The Societa Italiana, no? Sinight ng case na to yung Commissioner of Taxation versus Glencore Investment, no? Okay. Okay. So, ang sinight niya dito na case is yung Glencore Investment versus the Commissioner of Taxation. No? Kasi ano naman yung nangyari dito, in-undervalue naman ng Glencore Investment yung mga copper na kuha niya sa Australia, undervalue niya pagdating na sa bintahan sa Glencore Investment also in Australia, no? Okay. So, in this case, pareho din sila. Talo din dito yung tax authority. Panalo po ang Glencore, no? Okay. So, with that, anong oras na, Hari? Nakailang oras na tayo?
1 hour 39.
Okay. So, sige. Kasi marami pa tayong gagawin eh. We'd like to say thank you po sa mga viewers natin. Anong nangyari dito sa Societa Italiana, pinanigan po ng court ang taxpayer, no? Kasi ang pricing talaga ng goods and services is free enterprise, no? So may reason din po sila. So with that, I would like to say thank you and good night everyone.